Today, we're diving into a story that starts with one couple's really painful marital breakdown, but ends up revolutionizing family law for an entire nation. Let's get right into it. See, this isn't just about two people. It's about how their personal struggle actually forced the highest court in the land to take a hard look at a law that, had trapped thousands of people in broken marriages for decades. So, to really get how a law was changed, we've got to start with the marriage that broke it. Okay, so let's look at the timeline here. Rosanna Tan and Mario Andal, they reconnect after almost 20 years apart, and boom, things move incredibly fast. They meet again in '95, they're engaged by June, married by December. But this whirlwind romance, it turned into a total nightmare. Just 4 years later, the marriage was pretty much over. And when you look at the court records, it paints a really, really tough picture. Mario would just disappear for days on end. Then he'd come home and just sleep for days. He even admitted to using drugs, marijuana and shabu, but all those promises to stop, they were always broken. He started getting paranoid, thinking people were out to get him and his daughter. He completely neglected his family, even during medical emergencies. And on top of all that, he was draining money from Rosanna's own business. It was, a complete and total breakdown of what a marriage is supposed to be. Okay, so Rosanna tries to legally end the marriage. But in the Philippines, that was way easier said than done. She was about to come face to face with a legal standard that honestly was almost impossible for most people to meet. You see, without divorce as an option, Rosanna's only way out was to have her marriage declared null and void from the very beginning. The grounds? Something called psychological incapacity. The big problem was that the legal definition of that term was a fortress. It was incredibly hard to prove. And the specific legal wall she hit was known as the Molina Doctrine. It was established back in 1997, and it basically created this set of super tough, super rigid hurdles for anyone trying to get their marriage nullified. Under Molina, you had to clear 3 huge hurdles. First, you had to prove the incapacity was a real, medically recognized personality disorder. You couldn't just say your spouse was a bad partner. Second, you needed an expert, a psychiatrist or psychologist, to get up there and testify, proving the root cause. And third, you had to show that this disorder was medically incurable, permanent, untreatable. It was basically treated like a medical case, not a relationship problem. It was so restrictive that years later, the Supreme Court itself came up with this really powerful metaphor to describe its own rule. They called the Molina Doctrine a straitjacket, an unforgiving standard that just didn't work for the messy realities of a broken marriage. But after years and years in the lower courts, Rosanna's case finally makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. And this gave the justices a really compelling reason to reconsider everything. The court started to see that its own past ruling had created some pretty harsh, unintended consequences. The Andal case was the perfect opportunity for them to ask a really important question. Was this law actually protecting marriage? Or was it just making suffering last longer? And just how harsh was it? Get this. In the first whole decade after the Molina Doctrine was created, the Supreme Court granted an annulment on these grounds in a signed decision exactly once. Just one time. That's how unbelievably high the bar was set. This case really shows the court's new way of thinking. Justice Leonen's words here are so telling. The goal wasn't to force a dead marriage to keep going, but to recognize that some unions were, as he put it, stillborn. They never had a chance, and they deserved a decent burial. So, the court took this chance and completely rewrote the rules. And this, right here, is the heart of the legal revolution we're talking about. Okay, let's break this down. The old way versus the new way. It's a night and day difference. Under the old Molina Doctrine, you had to have a psychiatrist. It was essential. Now, not required. Testimony from friends, family, people who actually know the spouse can be enough. Before, the problem had to be a literal medical illness, a diagnosable disorder. Now it's about a clear pattern of behavior that shows they just can't handle their marital duties. And this last one is huge. Incurable used to mean medically incurable. Now it means legally incurable, meaning the person's inability to be a spouse is persistent specifically in relation to that one partner. So here's the new definition, simplified. Psychological incapacity isn't about diagnosing a mental illness anymore. It's about proving a clear, serious, and ongoing inability to follow through on the most basic duties of marriage, and that this inability stems from a really serious psychological issue that was there when they got married. So this change wasn't just some legal technicality. It had a massive impact, not just for Rosanna, but for countless other people. And after that incredibly long legal fight, the Supreme Court finally ruled in Rosanna's favor. Using these new, more humane standards, her marriage was officially declared void. The court found that there was clear and convincing evidence that Mario simply couldn't perform his essential duties as a husband.
So let's sum up why this is such a big deal for everyone. First, it makes the whole process more accessible. You don't have to be able to afford super expensive expert witnesses anymore. It's also more humane. The focus is now on the real-life problems in the marriage, not on some rigid medical diagnosis. It gives people a clearer, more realistic path forward when they're stuck in marriages that are just completely broken. The standard of proof is still high, mind you, clear and convincing evidence, but it's actually achievable now.
And this last quote from the court really just sums up the whole new philosophy perfectly. Their job isn't to force a patently ill-equipped marriage to continue. It's about protecting the idea of marriage by being honest and recognizing when a real marital bond, well, when it never really existed in the first place.
So, the Tan-Andal ruling completely changed the game for family law in the Philippines. It shifted things from a rigid, almost punishing system to one that actually acknowledges the human reality of a failed marriage. And that leaves us with this really big question to think about. Does giving people a more realistic and humane way out of a broken marriage ultimately strengthen the institution of marriage, or does it weaken it?